At 1:07 in the afternoon on November 17, 1965, the lead elements of 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry reached a clearing called Landing Zone Albany. 8 minutes later, a North Vietnamese ambush opened along an American column extending hundreds of meters through high grass and woodland. Most of the company commanders had been called to the front, away from their units. Artillery and aircraft were available, but uncertain positions and close contact made that support difficult to use. Initial Army figures listed 151 Americans killed, 121 wounded, and 5 missing. Yet only a day earlier, another battalion of the same regiment had survived a larger confrontation at Landing Zone X-Ray. Why did the American airmobile system hold at X-Ray, then nearly fail at Albany? The answer begins with the campaign around the Special Forces camp at Plai My. In October, North Vietnamese regulars attacked the camp and an approaching South Vietnamese relief force. The newly arrived 1st Cavalry Division pursued them by helicopter. American ground forces and regular North Vietnamese regiments under a larger headquarters were entering their first major conventional contest. Both armies were testing methods they expected to use again. The Americans wanted to exploit speed, using helicopters to place infantry, artillery, and supplies where roads offered little help. The North Vietnamese intended to regroup near Cambodia and prepare another attack on Plai My. Their staging area overlapped the ground. The 1st Cavalry Division planned to search. They were not waiting in a trap prepared for one predicted landing. 2 operations were moving toward the same massif. Colonel Thomas Brown directed Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore's 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry toward Chu Pong. Intelligence maps marked a probable enemy base, and reconnaissance found trails and communications wire near the clearings. Moore did not believe he was entering empty jungle. He chose one landing zone so his understrength battalion of several hundred men could concentrate as one force rather than arrive at separated sites. X-Ray could accept only 8 to 10 Hueys at one time. Although the assault formation included 16 troop helicopters, the battalion entered in successive lifts from Plai My, each round trip taking about 30 minutes. Artillery prepared the area before the first troops arrived late on November 14th. Company B secured the clearing while patrols examined the western approaches. From the air, X-Ray appeared relatively open. On the ground, tall elephant grass, scattered trees, large anthills, and a dry creek bed divided the terrain. Dense vegetation continued west toward the slopes of Chu Pong. The ground concealed movement and made friendly positions difficult to identify from above. Those details would determine whether American supporting fire could be delivered quickly and safely. At 11:20, a patrol captured a North Vietnamese deserter. He reported 3 battalions on the mountain, a warning that substantial forces were nearby while only part of Moore's battalion was on the ground. At almost the same time, North Vietnamese commander Chu Huy Man changed his plan. Units preparing for renewed action against Plai My were redirected toward X-Ray. By noon, 2 battalions of the 66th Regiment and a composite battalion from the 33rd were preparing to attack. Contact intensified northwest of the clearing. One American platoon pursued an enemy group, became separated, and formed a small perimeter. Other North Vietnamese units pressed toward X-Ray from several approaches. Moore had to protect the landing zone, continue the airlift, reinforce threatened sectors, and direct artillery and aircraft. The battle was a contest over whether the Americans could keep their combined system connected. That system depended on radios, observers, known positions, nearby artillery, aircraft overhead, and helicopters able to enter the clearing. Smoke, dust, and few clear terrain references initially complicated coordination. As positions became defined, artillery could be adjusted along the approaches. Gunships and aircraft struck beyond the perimeter, while lift crews brought in Moore's remaining troops, supplies, and a reinforcing company. The isolated platoon remained cut off through the night, using radio contact and carefully adjusted artillery to hold its position. The main perimeter also faced repeated pressure. Moore tightened his companies around X-ray and registered defensive fires. On November 15th, 2nd Battalion, 5th Cavalry, marched overland from Landing Zone Victor and reached X-ray around noon. With that added strength, American troops reached the isolated platoon at about 3:10 that afternoon. By then, the balance had shifted. The North Vietnamese had not broken the perimeter while Moore's battalion was incomplete. X-ray now had more infantry, organized sectors, and reliable fire support. Further attacks early on November 16th failed to change that position. Relief troops arrived before noon, and Moore's battalion withdrew by helicopter that afternoon. The later official Army history records 79 Americans killed and 121 wounded at X-ray. American reports counted 634 North Vietnamese dead and added larger estimates, but those estimates remain disputed. The narrower conclusion is firm. Moore's battalion held the landing zone, the opposing units suffered substantial losses, and air mobility worked when command, reinforcement, logistics and fire support remained coordinated. The next movement was shaped partly by another air operation. X-ray lay near the planned safety zone for incoming B-52 strikes, so the troops still there had to move. On the morning of November 17th, 2nd Battalion, 5th Cavalry marched toward Landing Zone Columbus, while Lieutenant Colonel Robert McDade's 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry continued toward Albany. After the two battalions separated, McDade declined an offer of marching artillery fire because he believed it might reveal his position. That choice had military logic, but removed one layer of protection. More important, the formation changed. The lead and rear companies moved cautiously, while parts of the middle compressed as heat and high grass complicated control. Near Albany, scouts captured two deserters. McDade came forward to question them, and the column halted for much of an hour. When movement resumed, it extended roughly 500 to 600 meters, with several leaders away from their companies. North Vietnamese forces were also moving through the area. Chu Huy Man's deputy, Nhu Huan, learned that the Americans were approaching and ordered an attack. Battalion Commander Le Xuan Phuoc arranged his troops in an L-shaped ambush beside Albany. At 1:15, 8 minutes after the American scouts entered the clearing, the attack struck the head and length of the column. The timing separated the battalion command group from much of the force behind it. Albany became several disconnected engagements. The column could not form one perimeter as at X-ray. Radio links and unit boundaries were uncertain, preventing commanders from identifying safe lines for artillery and aircraft. North Vietnamese troops stayed close, reducing the supporting fire advantage. Small groups established local defensive positions, while command and communication were restored. Air support began affecting the battle during the afternoon. Reinforcements arrived by helicopter around 6:30, and other companies moved overland from Columbus. By nightfall, the surviving positions were more secure, with artillery and aircraft supporting them through the darkness. Albany had not destroyed the battalion, but it had shown how quickly surprise, dispersion, and close contact could interrupt the system that had worked at X-ray. The human cost made the contrast unmistakable. The roughly 400 Americans at Albany suffered casualties approaching 70% in the initial Army accounting. North Vietnamese losses were serious, and Le Xuan Phuoc did not survive, but American estimates of those losses were especially uncertain. No organized count supported the precise totals later claimed. Albany was not a second X-ray or merely its final phase. It was a separate November 17th ambush with its own decisions, formations, and result. Ia Drang produced two tactical lessons. X-ray showed that helicopters could deliver infantry into remote terrain and sustain it with reinforcement, resupply, evacuation, artillery, and air power. Albany showed that an airmobile battalion on the ground was still light infantry. If helicopters could not enter, positions were unclear, or the enemy closed the distance, many advantages narrowed. The campaign also demanded enormous maintenance, fuel, airlift, and fire support resources. American commanders emphasized the losses they believed they had imposed and treated X-ray as evidence for attrition. North Vietnamese commanders drew value from Albany and their ability to reduce American firepower through surprise and close engagement. Neither conclusion told the entire story. X-ray was a genuine tactical success. Albany was a near disaster that early official accounts often minimized. Together, they revealed the power and limits of the new American method. The real trap in the Ia Drang Valley was not a clearing secretly prepared for one battalion. It was the temptation to turn a tactical result into a theory of war. Helicopters could solve distance, but not every problem created by terrain formation, intelligence, and command. Firepower could preserve a position, but not guarantee, control, or make disputed body counts a measure of strategic progress. X-ray showed how the 7th Cavalry could survive when its system functioned. Albany showed what could happen when that system was disrupted before taking shape. The larger war would test both lessons for years.